Welcome to Storytime number 206. Yes, it is really that many. In association with Ambassador Cruise Line. Thank you so much for being the sponsors of this insane programme that today has me, who is a relatively familiar contributor to this, although sporadic, and I'm delighted to say my colleague on Test Match Special, live all the way from Islamabad. It's Andy Zaltzman. Andy, how's it going? One more test to go. You excited for it? The raking of the pitch, the burning of the pitch, the presumably the votive offerings given to various gods on the pitch.
Yeah, everybody's very excited about the pitch, Dan. It's all about the pitch, it's nice to have a series decider, which is a relatively rare thing in Test cricket. And all the news about what they've been doing to the surface, as you say, the raking, the cooking. I think they've enlisted a small army of moles to burrow under the pitch, with strict instructions only to burrow to the surface when England are batting, and then to clear up after themselves when Pakistan going. This is going to be a unique Test match. But no, it's exciting. Probably won't be quite as ludicrously high scoring as the last time England played in Rawalpindi, one of the highest scoring non-timeless tests of all time, with 506 for 475 overs on day one. But I think it should be a gripping game, Dan.
Yeah, well, every time you go to Pakistan, things happen. Your laptop usually explodes because of electrical malfunctions, but of late, it has been burning up because of the sheer plethora of statistics that have emerged,
yes,
not least from that first series that you went to a couple of years ago, and then the first Test match, which witnessed England's extraordinary 823 innings victory, and then I presume, like the madness of 20 wickets taken by Pakistan spinners.
Yes.
So this has got a lot to live up to, this game.
It has. Statistically, there's been all sorts going on in the five tests I've seen in Pakistan. And bear in mind, I think in England's first 6 tours, 18 tests, there were only 4 positive results in all the Test matches England played in Pakistan I think in the 20th century. I think there was those series. I did look it up the other day. So 14 draws and 4 positive results. So to have seen 5 positive results in 5 games, so I guess highlights how cricket has changed. One of my favourite stats of the series so far, though, was Sajid Khan bowling out England's numbers 3, 4 and 5, which is only the second time in the entire history of Test cricket that a spin bowler has hit the stumps of numbers 3, 4 and 5 in the same innings. And the other was Derek Underwood against New Zealand back in 1971.
Yeah, and they were a bit piss poor in 1971 New Zealand, so you can sort of you can see how that would have happened. Now then, for those of you who are wondering what story time is, if you're coming to this for the first time, which are presumably occasionally people do, otherwise no one would have found it at all. It's where we play something called Nerd Pledge, where wonderful people who support this program and support the Final Word podcast industrialist complex. And thank you very much for doing that, because it helped get me through the Women's T20 World Cup, which I've now returned from and am in Tooting. But you will pledge a number. It could be any number. It could be, for example, 2.06. It could be 2.06 in any currency you wanted, ideally not Turkish lira, because that's not much of a pledge, but in, for example, Great British pounds or Australian dollars. And then we are tasked with weaving a story around it. Sometimes you'll give us a clue, sometimes you'll give us no clue. We call that a free hit, in which we will just ramble and perambulate around the significance of the number given to us. And to give you a little flavour of what that might look like, I'm going to give you a sort of like a speed digest of that by hurling at Andy Zaltzman, because it is story time, episode number 206. Give me some famous 206s from history now.
Right. Well, let's start. Well, you asked me this just before we started recording, and the first one that came to mind was Martin Donnelly for New Zealand against England in 1949. And the reason I particularly remember this is because the first summer I sort of watched every ball of Test cricket was 1982. And I would have been 7 years old then. I started getting into cricket the previous summer. My dad had given me some books about the famous 1981 Ashes series. But 1982 was the first summer that I was consciously following it. And the England-Pakistan series. Well, but yeah, both of them had a pretty big summer in 82 as well as 81. Yes. He had a 208, I think, at the Oval against India.
At the Oval, yeah.
But the Lords, in what was a brilliant series between England and Pakistan. That ended 2-1 after a final test decider in England's favour. At Lords, Mohsin Khan scored a double century, and it's one of the first cricket stats I remember lodging in my mind, that they said on the telly it was the first double century in a Lords Test since Martin Donnelly in 1949. So that 206 has always been lodged in my memory. Donnelly also played rugby union for England. If you want another couple of 206s, Javed Miandad in his third Test, aged 19, scored 206 against New Zealand in
one of the youngest double hundreds, isn't it? I would think. Don't bother checking
yes,
it. But
he's the only teenage Test double centurion.
Oh.
Certainly in men's Test cricket. Let me get up the list for women's Test cricket. Oh, no, Mitali Raj at Taunton in 2002 made 214. So there you go, 2 in the entire history of Test cricket. So that's another classic 206 for you. Shane Warne's Test debut featured a 206 from Ravi Shastri, which took 477 balls over 572 minutes, slightly outshone by Sachin Tendulkar's 148 not out. He'd have been a teenager then as well, off 213
fuck
balls.
all tracer bullets, I should imagine, off Ravi Shastri's bat on that day.
Yes, well, that was true of his entire Test career. In fact, in India's first tour of South Africa in the 92-93 season, he scored 59 runs in 3 tests off, and I'm going to slightly guess this because I don't have it to hand, but it's something like 320 balls at less than 1 run per over in one of the most heroically dull batting performances. In terms of endurance dullness, not many have really managed to drag that out over 3 entire series. I might even have underdone the number of balls there, just doing some mental maths, but it was heroic. Warne's Test debut, 1 for 150 in that Indian innings. So if he'd carried on at that rate, he'd have had to play 708 Test matches to get his 708 wickets.
Yes, which would have been quite tricky, I think.
Yes,
I mean,
would have taken a long time.
Impossible.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, so there you go. You've got a flavour of how Storytime works and how we managed to weave 206, or indeed any number, into anything. And that in itself has lasted 15 minutes. Zolt sent me a message earlier on this week saying, how does this thing last for an hour and a quarter? Hopefully, he's now got a flavour of how that might happen, because we haven't even started on the first frigging number yet. And we used up about a quarter of an hour. But now you all know what it's about and whatnot. I'm going to dive straight in because we've got 4 numbers to get through, and I've got 2 of them. Zoltz has got 2 of them, and I'm going to kick off with what's been sent in. So I'm going to quote you what's been sent in. Lovely Bala Shivaraman has sent in 1.05 GBP, and he says here, and this is music to every Storytime solver's ears, there's no clue. We love that. Don't get me wrong. We love the abstruse, incredibly difficult clues as well. But sometimes when you don't have a clue, it means you can play some shots.
That's right. It's not the first time that a listener has told us that we've got no clue, Dan, is it? So.
No, absolutely not. No. I had quite a lot of that while I was out in Dubai. Mostly along the lines of, why are you there? No one cares. Which... it's always very interesting, isn't it, when people want to tell you that they don't care about these games. They've taken the trouble to care enough to tell you that they don't care. But, you know, let's pass on that for a while. He says, there's no clue. It's just the date my son was born last week. Oh, how lovely and heartwarming. The 22nd of September, which I'm choosing to take as 2209 for these purposes. So basically, I've got 2 numbers to play with. He says, so you guys have a freebie to talk about whatever you like in relation to anything you like, bearing in mind that when he's old enough, I will play it to him as inspiration for him to facilitate my dream of spending my retirement travelling the world watching cricket. Well, Bartlett, we wish you great luck in that endeavour, and I hope that what is about to unfurl from our mouths is going to be inspiration enough to make that happen. So, what I've done is, I've weaved a story of 105s and 22nd of September. To start with, because I think it's important for Barlow, let's just get some cricketing birthdays out the way that share his son's birthday. He hasn't told us his son's name, but if he hasn't decided yet, here are some options. Martin Crowe was born on the 22nd of September. Big name. Big name.
Classic.
Well, it's actually quite a short name, but
amazing man as well.
He was an amazing man, wasn't he? 299 he got, and he just fell one short of that first 100 for New Zealand.
And then McCullum got it years and years later against India in batting for a draw in the second innings. But I met Martin Crowe a couple of times when I was working with Cricinfo, and he used to write a column for them, and absolutely fascinating man. And he, sorry, this is dragging out even longer. But he wrote one of the best columns I've ever read from an ex-player about the processes of being an international cricketer. It was about how batting is played in the gaps between balls, and you'll find it if you look up Martin Crowe gaps. You'll probably find it. It was an extraordinary piece he did on Cricinfo many years ago. Much missed.
I'll check that out. And he was a lovely man, as you say. Sadly died of cancer, and he also invented Cricket Max, didn't he? Which I think caused a lot of people to get massive fear, but I thought it was hilariously funny. I think where you could sort of hit 18 if you got the ball inside an ostrich's mouth at deep backward square leg.
And double runs if you did it on the 22nd of September to tie it back in with this.
That's right. Yeah,
on Martin's
36
birthday.
off one ball. Yeah. In 1976, Tilan Samarawira was born, one of the most underrated and not discussed Sri Lankan batters. At one stage had a stratospheric average, came down a little bit towards the back end of his career, of course. But
still ended up over 50. And, in the list of players who've averaged 50 over a significant number of tests, he might well be the one who most people forget.
I think you're right. Yes. I mean, we could test that theory. But that would also be quite a long one, wouldn't it? Go and do a vox pop, wander around tooting back. It's like, name everybody with a test average of over 50. Test what?
Yeah. There you go. Well, wait for them to do it on Pointless, on the TV quiz.
Yeah, oh, Christ, yeah. Oh, God, wouldn't that be good? In 1978, Ed Joyce was born, a dual international. Funnily enough, there's going to be a little mention of the occasional dual international today, so I thought I'd bring him up. Played for Ireland, of course, as well as England. England first, then Ireland. In 1962, Chris Matthews was born, a man who's forgotten by most people except English cricket fans of a certain vintage, because he was part of quite simply the worst Australian bowling attack ever to face England. Well, with the exception of the 2010-11 Ashes, where Nathan Horrocks and Michael Beer and various assorted
Xavier
men with
Doherty,
rugs
let's
and
not
heads.
forget.
Xavier Doherty. Oh, lovely Xavier. He's another lovely man. Worked with him in Tasmania. Yep. Doug Bollinger, Ben Hilfenhaus, names that strike fear and terror into the hearts of Australian cricket fans. But Chris Matthews was a journeyman left armer. He was in the same side as Bruce Reid. And played his first test, didn't do badly, then got dropped, and it was even worse. So they brought him back, but he didn't last long. One of my favourites here is Lamek Onyango. He may be a name that you're not familiar with. He was a Kenyan one-day international bowler who was selected as a bowler, as bowlers often are, and over the course of 4 one-day internationals, managed combined figures of 1 for 130 at an economy rate of 9.62.
Right.
But undeterred by this, the Kenyan selectors then decided to play him as a non-bowling tail-ender, which a task he performed very well if the idea was not to score runs or indeed bowl. And they departed from the script for just one game to see if he might fancy being a pinch hitter at number 2. And he got a 25-ball boundaryless 13, and they abandoned that idea. Funnily enough, that is also a theme that's going to crop up slightly later in today's programme. And lastly, on the subject of notable events specifically that happened on our lad's birthday, the most important of them all was Surrey winning the county championship in 2022 when they beat Yorkshire by 10 wickets, which obviously overshadows absolutely everything that I've just said. But,
obviously.
But I've also got the number 105 in mind, you see. So, actually, no. I'm going to come back to that, because the other thing I've got in mind is the 22nd of September, other stuff like whole matches that have taken place on the 22nd of September, and blow me down with a feather if that isn't the last day of the, as was Madras, tied test match. Woof. Now, it's very upsetting to me that this happened in 1986. So there aren't Sky TV cameras there. It's taking place in India. So what footage you've got isn't great. Why do Tide Test matches insist on happening without really detailed TV coverage and 1.5 hour highlights packages for each day? Because it was an extraordinary Test match. For those of you who have either forgotten it or were maybe too young or unaware, it took place in Madras. 1986, 22nd of September it finished. Australia 574 for 7, declared on the third day. They took the time over it. Dean Jones made a miraculous 210, and it was a game, of course, famous for being a tied Test match, but also famous for Dean Jones being told that he's not a proper Australian if he goes off to puke up and piss blood. And what he should do is puke up and piss blood on a length. Alan Border was particularly angry with him for even suggesting that, now that he's hallucinating and shivering like mad, that he might be allowed possibly like a quarter of an hour off. But no, he wasn't. He'd come back inside after being dropped about 3 years ago. And in so doing, making that 210, he actually surpassed the previous highest score by an Australian in India. And this amazed me when you think about, maybe India just didn't play as many Test matches against Australia in India. But the highest score before that by an Aussie was a mere 167 by Graham Yallop, which I find utterly remarkable. It was a match that was dotted with terribly bad blood. Maninder Singh, more of whom in a moment, chased after Dean Jones when he's out in the second innings to give him a piece of his mind. Krishna Makari Srikanth shook his fist at close infielders. I'd have loved to have seen that because he's a particularly devilish-looking character, Krishna Makari Srikanth. There was a lot of complaining by Australians. Who would have thought it? Whinging Australians complaining about decisions being made by umpires. I think there was a lot of that generally in the 1980s. But it was an amazing test, as there wont to be, because after India made 397, Gavaskar playing in his 100th consecutive Test match, doing rather well. India made 397, avoid the follow-on, concede a lead of 177. Then Australia, they're in this phase when they're trying to, do positive cricket. And so they score 170 for 5, setting a target of 348, which India are doing rather well at, 94 for 1 by lunch, 193 for 2 at tea. And we've got like a really proper, the thing about tied Test matches is that both of them aren't tied, with like a session to spare. They're like tied in the last over. It's just the greatest form of cricket imaginable. Reminded me a little bit, as it's bound to, of the Gloucestershire match against Glamorgan this year, which came down to the very last ball, didn't it? Needing 593 to win. And there was an incredible catch by James Bracey off the last ball.
Yes.
Which Stephen Finn, incidentally, I did a podcast with him, and the footage of that was widely seen, much more widely seen than the footage of the 2 tied Test matches, but that's the nature of the modern world. We pointed out this on a podcast, says, wasn't it marvellous to see James Bracey's delight when he took the tie-making catch? And Finney went, I thought it was a fucking disgrace. What do you mean? Well, if you can't defend 592, just... I said, well, they did sort of defend it. They didn't lose. They didn't win. That's ex-cricketers for you. They're just thoroughly miserable people as a rule. Why wouldn't they be? Another little detail about Dean Jones in that Test match, he was made to change his spikes, which caused Bobby Simpson, the manager, to be furious and to charge onto the pitch, because he said he's allowed to wear whatever he wants. The umpires can tell him not to run on the pitch. But no, Deano, who by all accounts was quite an accommodating fellow, went off and got rubber soles. The Aussies at that time were not in for any of that kind of shit. So anyway, we get to tea with 155 needed to win, 30 overs to be bowled. And the Indians are getting there. Well, are they 331 for 5 at one point? With 17 needed? When a wicket goes down.
For 6, it was.
6,
just
I beg
looking
your
at the scorecard, yeah.
Wicket goes down. Suddenly, 3 quick wickets. Chetan Sharma is caught on the boundary. Kieran Moray, little Kieran Moray, the most expensive drop in Test match history in 1990 at Lords. As Geoffrey Boycott said, and I mentioned on the last podcast, if I were the captain of India, I'd put my hands on little Kieran Moray's throat and tell him you've cost this team 286 runs, which is the sort of lovely thing that Boycott would do. More of him shortly. He's out first ball. Then another wicket goes down. 4 are needed off the last over. And Ravi Shastri, of whom we have just spoken, gets a 2. Lovely. 2 to win. But at the other end is Mendes Singh, truly the Ebadot Hussain stroke Nahid Rana of 1986. Dog shit batter. Shastri decides to take a single because he thinks, right, I've got to take the run so we don't lose. I can kind of understand that. But there are 3 balls left with the worst batter in the world on strike. And bugger me if he doesn't go back into his crease. And he's given out LBW off the penultimate ball. It must have been as plum can be for an Indian umpire to have given that out. It's almost unimaginable. Or else he thought there's just no way they're going to get a run anyway. Sparking wild celebrations and general excitement, or not. Because I always imagine in a tied test match that basically both sides walk off as just pissed off, don't they? Side batting probably more pissed off.
Batting, you think, yes, more annoyed. Is there a sense where you feel you've done something completely historic, given that was only the second tied test? There hasn't been one since. We've had over 2,500 tests and only two ties. Maybe in rugby, it always seems a draw is anticlimactic, but in cricket, I think there's something about it so rare in red ball cricket. I think it must have felt like a special moment. To put in context, Mendes Singh's batting, 35 tests, he scored 99 runs, average 3.8. But in first-class cricket, average 16, almost 17, scored a century and 5 other 50s. So
fuck me.
He obviously just couldn't. I don't know. The step up was obviously quite significant.
The Ranji Trophy might have been played on some pretty dead pitches against some pretty poor bowlers.
It does
maybe
inflate a lot of batting
in the
averages.
1980s,
certainly.
Yes. Right. So I'm nearly done. Don't worry. But I'm now going to take you because I've got one last zinger to finish us off with. I'm now going to take you because I've given you what happened on the 22nd of September. And unfortunately, no 105s involved. There was a 106 Alan Border got. Tantalising, but not quite.
Dean Jones got 210, which is 2 105s.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that is 2 105s. Maybe if Fowler, well, after 2 months of pledging, Fowler would have nailed it. But I asked if you could take a look at Test Match 105, or at least we dug out Test Match 105, and I found it, actually. And I initially discarded it as a rather boring draw. It was at the end of an Ashes series in which Australia had some fantastic players playing. Gregory, Bardsley, Monty Noble, Warwick Armstrong, Charlie McCartney. Victor Trumper batting at 6. You did him as your specialist subject on Mastermind. Was that normal for him to be batting at 6?
Well,
was that later in his career?
I think batting orders were much less settled in those days, and players would go up and down much more than they do now. He did open a lot. Famously got a 100 before lunch in 1902 at Old Trafford, I think it was. I'm just looking at his career stats. Played 48 tests and batted once at 11. Yes, presumably he was injured or ill. Yeah. Once at 8, and then mostly opening, but then batted at 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Four innings at number 7, 11 innings at number 6. And averaged 69 at number 5 in 10 innings, including his highest Test score, 214 not out. So yeah, I think then batting positions were far more flexible, not just because of the when pitches changed due to rain and a drying pitch being very difficult to bat on, so the teams would jumble up their batting order to try and protect their good players for when the pitch got easier again. But also I think maybe just people gave less of a shit about where they batted and weren't quite so precious about it.
Well, oddly enough, that theme is going to come up slightly later in the show on my next number. But he made 73 and 20, batting at 6. I mean, the raw details of the game are fairly dull. Australia 325, England 352, Australia 339 for 5. But it's notable for a few things, not least of which is that a fella he's down at the scorecard as John Sharp, but if you dig around, you find that he's known as Jack Sharp, because lots of Johns were Jacks in those days. And he deliciously, in Test match number 105, Barler, scores 105, which, that's big on the 105ing. But more than that, Just a few other little oddities, because England had a pretty good team out there. Wilf Rhodes batting at 3, incidentally, making 66 CB Fry. But Douglas Carr. Now, Douglas Carr is a story, because Douglas Carr plays one test match and one test match only, and it is this test match. Takes 5 for 146 in the first innings. Our fella Jack Sharp, who's in as a left-arm fast-medium bowler, incidentally, takes 3 for 67. And Douglas picks up some wickets in the second innings as well. And what's notable about here, isn't it, that he played Test cricket in his first full season as a first-class player, because he was basically a bit shit at cricket. He was okay, played club cricket. He was actually a much better footballer. And at university, he buggered his knee and never got to play cricket for Oxford University in that season, because he was injured. So he goes off and he plays his cricket in his local area, around Maidstone, I think was his club. And he suddenly hears about the googly, Bosanquet. And he thinks, well, I'll give that a go. And he says, over the winter, I perfected the googly, but unfortunately stopped being able to bowl the leggy, meaning that he was an out-and-out googly bowler, which rather sort of fucks up the point of the googly, which is it's supposed to bamboozle you, because you're thinking, oh, hang on, that's not a leggy, it's turned the other way. But he has this bright spot in his career, but it is very, very short-lived for Douglas. It's that game, and it's pretty much that game alone.
Yes, and he was 37 then. That was he made his first-class debut that season, and so he was sort of a mystery spinner, and you can see that on the scorecard. So England bowled first, and he got out Gregory for 1, Noble for 2, and Armstrong for 15, and then Australia clearly sort of worked him out, and he ended up with 5 for 146 from 34 overs, and picked up a couple of wickets, but it was again expensive. 2 for 136 and 35 in the second innings, and that was him done as a Test player. But obviously he was sort of a mystery spinner that they wouldn't have seen, and it took them, I don't know, maybe an hour to work him out. By which time he'd taken 3 wickets.
Well, presumably because he got this brilliant leg break action, and no one had seen him. They all came trooping in again. I can't believe it. I think he bowls offie. So he's done with an offie. No, he's a leggy. No. The next one comes in. No, he's definitely an offie. Nah, bollocks, he's a leggy. Next one gets out. Then they actually bother looking and go, he hasn't turned a single ball from leg to off. What happens if we play him as an offie? Oh, right. Yeah, end of career. There's a lot of anger about him being overbowled and that sort of thing that takes place in the game. A couple of other little nice oddities in that is that Jack Sharp, our hero's taken 105 and 3 for with the ball, actually played 11 seasons for Everton and gets 2 England caps. Yeah, yes, he's well known for that.
Impressive.
And he played in the 1904 Lancashire team, which was invincible in the county championship. Played every game of that season. And then this is a detail I particularly liked. He came back after the war, played a little bit, but he's getting on a lot here by now. And he captains Lancashire for 3 seasons as an amateur between 1923 and 1925, aged 45 to 47, which is, it's a nice way to end your career.
That was quite young for county cricket in those days, wasn't it?
Well, I suppose. Yeah, there'd have been a few still knocking about. well beyond that. I suppose the First World War took its toll, so you had to backfill with the elderly. But,
yes,
yeah.
That's one of the great understatements you've ever uttered. The First World War took its toll.
Well, I'm only trying to do what Michael Henderson in that terrifically useless article in the Critic said, that we don't do enough understatement. So there's a bit of understatement for you,
yes.
Hendo.
Just another thing on that 1909 Oval Test. Sharp was one of Ankar, 2 of the 5 players who never played for England again after that Test match, and that was one of only 6 tests since 1900 in which 5 or more England players have played their final Test match.
It feels like a lot of players to play your final Test, though, in one game, doesn't it? And it's 1909, so you could understand it if it was 1914, sorry to go back to that theme, or indeed 1939 in Durban. I should imagine there were a few missing
Well,
from
actually, it was England
1946,
played
wasn't it?
West Indies at the Oval in '39.
Oh, shit,
and
yeah. Well,
six
okay,
players
yes.
never played Test cricket again from that team.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's no enormous surprise. But yeah, I mean, for it to happen in 1909 does seem a little bit bizarre. And even more bizarre is that poor old Jack, who clearly was continuing to play cricket, only got to play 3 test matches despite scoring 105 in the 105th test match, which you'd think would be enough for people to say, although in Edwardian English, who writes your scripts? Who?
Or at least call him back for the 200th Test match and see if he gets a double hundred as well.
You'd think. Anyway, I'm leaving that Test match there, but my final perambulation for you on these numbers, it has to be the last one because it's the ultimate zinger because it brings both of our numbers together. Don't forget, 22nd of September and 1:05. A Test match was played which finished on the 22nd of September in 1982 between Sri Lanka and India. You alerted me to this fact. And again, I mean, the details are quite fun, actually, insofar as Sri Lanka scored 346, India 566 for 6, a big lead of 220. Sri Lanka, and they're very new to Test cricket at this stage, even though they've still got the likes of Arjuna Ranatunga playing and Ranjan Madigali, who we know so well from now. Arjuna Ranatunga, I think, made his debut, didn't he, at 16 or something insane. But they've now, by scoring 394, set India 175, but in not very many overs. Only 28 overs get bowled in the second innings, and India falls short, 135 for 7. And as part of the theme, one of the themes of today, which is unusual batting orders, Sunil Gavaskar comes in at number 9, presumably because fresh from remembering him getting 36 in a 65 over match, they thought, or 60 over match, they thought he's just going to refuse to try to score the runs, so let's not get him to do it. But amidst all of this, Mendes, Duleep Mendes?
Duleep Mendes, yes.
Well, you'll never guess what score he got in the first innings, dear listener. It's 105. Yeah, you say. Okay, so you found a 105. But, dear listener, in the second innings, you'll never guess what he got. He got 105, and his innings finished on the 22nd of September. It was a drawn match. It was quite an exciting drawn match, but Duleep Mendes getting 205s in a Test match that ends on the 22nd of September. Bala, if that isn't enough to inspire your son to become one of the great cricketers of all time and allow you to live the life of luxury that you so clearly deserve, I don't know what is. There you go. That's 105, and it's the 22nd of September. What have you got for us, Zaltz?
Well, this is from Tom Stewart, Dan. 25 GBP, Great British Pound. I don't know what the Great's referring to. The British
that is
or
a
pounds?
lot.
Yes.
Hang on. What's his name? John Stewart?
Tom Stewart.
Tom Stewart.
Yes.
Tom Stewart. He's loaded.
Evidently. 25.00. So that's 2,500 pence. 25 pounds. 2,500 also. The year by which people will have stopped arguing about whether or not Ben Foakes should be in the England team. That's when that argument's going to end. So I thought, this in terms of what 25 or 2,500 means in cricket. So I was looking at the 2,500th international, men's and women's, and it was the 1994 Wills Triangular Series final, which took place in Lahore on the 30th of October 1994 between Australia and Pakistan. Mark Waugh scored 38 off 50. 50, of course, is 1/50th of 2,500. And in doing so, he passed 2,500 one-day international career runs by completely unnoticed serendipity. In that one-day international, Phil Emery played his only ODI. He was a very fine wicket-keeper, but he was stuck behind Ian Healy. He scored 11 not out. He also only played one test in which he scored 8 not out. So he spanned 2 formats and was never dismissed, but only played 2 games, which little bit unlucky.
I'm amazed they didn't bring him back out of retirement about 2007 to play one T20 international.
Well, yes, he was the last of only 3 Australian men who have one cap in both Tests and one-day internationals. And these were a couple of new cricketers to me, digging around with this. Ashley Woodcock played one Test against New Zealand in 1973-4, and also one ODI against New Zealand around about the same time. He had played against the rest of the world in the 71-72 Australia v Rest of the World series that replaced the cancelled South Africa tour, but those aren't considered Test matches, despite some of the unutterable shit cricket that is considered Test matches. But he played one official Test and one official ODI. And Jeff Moss, who had a very good first-class record, part of the Victoria Sheffield Shield winning team in 1978-9, played a Test against Pakistan in Perth in March of 1979, scored 22 and 38 not out. Played a one-day international against Pakistan in the World Cup of 1979. 4 Australian women players have had one Test and one-day international. For England, 3 men and 1 woman have played one Test and one ODI. Mark Benson. Oh, do you want to guess the other 2?
Well,
the other 2 men.
One Test and one ODI. So, could it be something like John Stevenson?
No, I'll give you a clue. And this is true. So 4 England players, 1 woman, 3 men, have played one Test and one ODI. 3 of them had relatives who also played international cricket. So Jill Powell was the woman. Her twin sister was also an international cricketer. So Mark Benson is the exception. So can you tell me the other 2, Dan, who had a relative who played international cricket? Played one Test and one-day international each.
A relative who played... Oh, no, I mean, that's starting to get tricky because, it couldn't be a Dexter, it couldn't be a Hutton, it won't be a Compton because he played too many Test matches, it won't be a Greg, it won't be a Stewart. No, I'm running out.
Stewart, you're warmer with Stewart. You're much warmer with Stewart.
What, Surrey connection?
Surrey,
or
father-son?
Father-son.
The father played one Test and one-day international.
Oh, did he? What, Mickey Stewart? Did he play one-day international?
No, he didn't. No, he played, I think, 7 Test matches off the top of my wasted head.
Now I don't know. You have to tell me.
Alan Butcher.
Of course, Alan Butcher.
One Test.
Of course, because I was at his only Test, 1979. He scored 14 and 21, and he batted so long, he batted himself out of contention. Had he got Norton 1, I think he would probably have played. Yeah. Did Joey Benjamin play one Test and one-day international?
No. He played one Test. I don't know about his ODI career, but on this, if my database is correct, and I put together a special spreadsheet for this, Dan, Alan Butcher, father of Mark Butcher, and the other was Alan Wells, played one Test, got a duck in the first ball duck, I think caught short leg off Ambrose, and then 3 not out in the second innings at the end of a tame draw at the end of the 95 England-West Indies series. He also played one-day international. And his brother, Colin Wells, played a couple of one-day internationals for England as well. So there you go. There's a little niche fact for you.
Andy Lloyd would have got close to that because I think he played one Test before detaching his retina. But a very small number of one-day internationals, about 3 or something.
So that would have been, I think they used to play 3-match series before a 5-Test series.
Before, exactly,
so maybe he played those. Only one player has one cap in all 3 formats in men's and women's cricket. And this is the South Africa Women's International, Nonkululeko Peaceful Tabethe. And apologies if I've mangled the pronunciation of any of those names. I think I'm quite confident with
Nonkululeko is absolutely spot on because her namesake Malaba has been playing a lot with great distinction of late.
One Test, one ODI, one T20, all against India in November 2014. In the Test, 2 off 8 in the first innings, 0 off 26 in the second innings. In one ODI, 0 off 2, and in a one T20, 0 off 1 run out. And that was that.
So is that 2? Sorry, so how many international runs is that in total of how many balls? 2.
2 off 37 across 3 formats, all in the space of about 2 weeks.
In 4 innings?
Yep.
0.5. Well, they gave her a go, didn't they?
Yes. There's 2,000 for a couple of other 2,500s. I had Viv Richards. That's the total test runs Viv Richards scored before a hiatus in his test career due to the Packer World Series cricket split in cricket, in which in his first series in World Series cricket he had spectacular numbers as well. Again, you look at cricket that ought to be considered test cricket or has certainly a more valid case than other test cricket, particularly some of those early tests, and the 2005 Australia v ICC World 11 match. We look at Viv Richards' career, only just averaged over 50, but scored some big runs in those games as well. Richie Benaud, when he was aged 25, averaged exactly 25 batting. So I'm going on to 25s now from 2,500.
That's good. That's good.
25.00. He took his first
in the year he was 25, or at the point. Oh,
in the year that he was 25, he averaged exactly 25 batting. And having just turned 26, he played his 25th test and took his first test fifer in his 25th test. He had very moderate figures for a long time with bat and ball. And then, particularly with the ball, it took 12 more test fifers in his next 25 tests, had one more after that, and over a sort of 4-5 year span, he and Alan Davidson were an unstoppable pairing for Australia. The highest taking 25-year-old in test history, the highest wicket taking 25-year-old is Matthias Muralitharan, who I imagine has that record for various ages, but he took 67 wickets as a 25-year-old in 11 tests. Average, strap in, Dan, 25.1. So I've got a few other 25s.
Just before you do, very briefly, I just want to give you a quick digression about Alan Davidson and Richie Benaud. Did I ever tell you my story about those two?
You didn't, Dan, no, but I feel you were about to.
And you would be correct. So I was at Lord's many moons ago when Alan Davidson was still with us, and I was introduced to Alan by Colin Croft, with whom I'd done a little bit of work on Test Match Sofa. And it was some dinner or other. Crofty says, Daniel, this is Alan. Or he just says, points me in the direction of this strapping man, fabulous hands. Picture of him, incidentally, in Dubai International Cricket Stadium, which I think is good. They recognise a great man. Anyway, he did not break stride. He grabbed my hand firmly. And I'm going to get these numbers slightly wrong. You might be able to actually verify them for me. But broadly speaking, this was the thrust of what he said. He goes, 1960-61, I took 25 wickets against West Indies. 21 of them were numbers 1 to 6. Fucking Richie fucking Benaud takes 28 fucking wickets. 21 of them are numbers 7 to 11. Who gets all the fucking credit? Fucking Benaud, that's who. I think he meant it with a certain joviality, but it was the most extraordinary. It was like, it was not a, how'd you do? What are you doing, cricket? Blah, blah. He'd been festering on that for the best part of 50 years. So I don't know how easy it is for you to find out the reality of those numbers. It's roughly in that ballpark.
Not be classic podcast listening, Dan, to be fiddling around with that. We're taking over.
Well, I suppose how many wickets they got in the series each. I don't know how easy it is to find that out.
Well, I'll get their bowling, Ben Davison's. I mean, he was a phenomenal bowler. He took, in fact, here's a nice little link. His breakthrough test series, which was Australia in South Africa in 1957-58, and I think Ian Craig was their controversially appointed captain, a very young player.
Oh, yes.
And Davison took 25 wickets in that series. Now, he ended up with 186 wickets, averaged 20.5 in 44 tests. But after 12 tests, Dan, tell me, how many test wickets had Alan Davison taken?
Oh, I'm going to go for somewhere 25?
No, it's not 25, sadly, which would tie this up. But it was 16 at an average of 34. But if you add 16 and 34 together, that's 50. You divide it by 2, it's 25. I mean, that's a completely meaningless link. But 16 wickets at 34 in 12 tests. And then from that point onwards, was one of the most effective test bowlers in the history of the game. I'll just get his stats. Let's say for his next 25 tests, after that. In fact, played 32 tests. But the next 25, 137 wickets at 18.4, which I would say is pretty tidy. And in all, 170 at 19.2 over the rest of his career. So he was a tremendous bowler.
And amidst all that, he probably played the most significant innings of the 1961 Ashes by scoring 70-odd in that famous Old Trafford Test, a book of which is out now, Richie Benaud's Blue Suede Shoes, which extended Australia's lead to be just too much for England to chase. And then they were famously, of course, bowled out by fucking Benaud on the last day.
I think he had an 80 in the first tied test as well, from memory.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. He was the man for the big occasion, and a big man he was too. Anyway, sorry, I digress, because you got me a few more 25s before we move on.
Yes, a few more 25s. The first player to play 25 tests for England was George Ulyett, who was a Yorkshire all-rounder, more of a batter than a bowler over the course of his career, but did take a 7 for in a test match. But he played 25 tests for England. He played in the first ever test. He scored a pair of half centuries in England's first test win, which was the second test ever played. He was the first England player to score a test 100 away from home when he made 149 at the MCG in March 1882, a match in which he became the first player in test to score a century and another 50-plus score in the same match, 149 and 64 against Fred Spofforth, Garrett Boyle, Palmer, Giffen. Strong Australian attack, and he was out. He opened the batting, made 149. He was 239 for 6 when he was out. So that was an early assault on the Bannerman. The Bannerman highest percentage of a complete. If he'd managed to stay in there, who knows? That could have been his record, as it is, as we know.
We could have been calling it. It could have been the Elliott.
Yes, exactly.
Bannerman's better name, though, isn't it? Yeah.
Also, 25 tests played by Aubrey Faulkner. One of the great South African players, leg spinning all rounder, averaged 40 with the bat and 20, just under 27 with the ball. Before I go on with Faulkner, just another century and a 50 plus for England in women's Test cricket. Jeanette Britton, 146 and 59 and out at Guildford in her 25th Test at Guildford, which is just outside the M25. And it was in 1998, which was 25 years ago last year. And also, she is the only woman to have played 25 tests. Jeanette Britton, she played 27 in all. 697 men have played 25 tests, if you want an illustration of the...
Is that right? So is Jeanette Britton the most capped test player with 27?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. Think what Betty Snowball could have achieved.
Indeed.
If she'd had the chances that Jan Britton had had.
Just on Faulkner, and it's always nice to talk about Aubrey Faulkner, and I know he's a favourite of Jared Kimber, who's basically obsessed with him. I'm pretty sure has him, if not physically tattooed, certainly tattooed on his soul. His 25 Test career, 1,754 runs, average 40.7, 82 wickets at 26.5. Here's a list of players with 1,500 runs at 40 plus and 75 wickets or more at under 27 in a 25 Test sequence at any point in their careers. And bear in mind, this is Faulkner's entire career. The list is 5 players.
Imran Khan?
No, he did have a high average, but not that many runs because there were quite a lot of games where he only batted once in that sequence. I'll come to he's coming in a bit, Dan. You'll get your Imran Khan fix, don't worry, since I'm here in Islamabad, where he is currently having a non-voluntary staycation. So aside from Aubrey Faulkner, 4 other players have scored 1,500 at 40 plus and taken 75 wickets at under 27 per wicket in a 25 Test sequence. 2, you might guess.
Ian Botham? Ian Botham early in his career? No, didn't quite manage it?
No.
Keith Mellor?
No.
Gary Sobers?
Sobers, yes. And
Callis.
The other 2 slightly surprising names and perhaps slightly underrated cricketers, I think. And also it shows how the Danes are looking at career averages. 1, Chris Cairns of New Zealand, who was a phenomenal cricketer, and Andrew Flintoff, whose overall career numbers aren't spectacular, but peak Flintoff, which encompasses this 25 Test sequence, was absolutely phenomenal.
That's 2004 to 2006, is it?
Yes, around about then, yeah. So, but if you look at, I like looking at players' peaks, and Aubrey Faulkner in 10 tests across 2 series against England and Australia, 1909-10 against England and South Africa, and then in Australia in 1910-11 scored 1,277 runs, which broke the 10-match Test scoring record by over 250 runs, but had been set by Clem Hill. I mean, he didn't notice it at the time, 1898 to 1902. It stood until Bradman, and then no one else beat it other than Bradman until Dennis Compton in 47 and 48. Then there was a handful of players who beat Faulkner's 10-match scoring record. Walcott, Sobers, Barrington, Pollock, Richards, Viv Richards, Gavaskar, Mark Taylor, Gooch, and Aravinda De Silva to the end of the 20th century. And then from the year
Everton
2000...
Weeks not manage that? Everton Weeks didn't manage that in his long sweet sequence of hundreds. Oh.
Yeah, but since then, since 2000, well, if you want the full list, Andy Flower, Hayden, Vaughan, Lara, Ponting, Callis, Gibbs, Dravid, Yunus Khan, Mohammed Yusuf, Sangakkara, Joe Warden, Agambe, Samara Wira, Sehwag, Tendulkar, Cook, Clark, Warner, Smith, Williamson, Cody, Labuschagne and Root. So the next player to do it will be the 25th player of this millennium to outdo Aubrey Faulkner in a 10-test batting sequence.
And surely it will be Kamindu Mendes.
You think he's got to have a very good chance?
I think he must have a very good chance. Yeah. Well, I think that would be a very appropriate taker honour of the mantle.
Yes.
The 25th person to take on that mantle. So what does this tell us, do you think, Zoltz? It just tell us that batting's got much easier?
Yes, well, I think particularly the first 10, 12 years of the millennium were very batting dominated and also a lot of very good players. So I think it was almost sort of peak of the art of batting in some ways, that it was players who had the sort of old school techniques, but also the modern range of strokes, and but still that sort of discipline to just keep batting long. Also, there were a lot of pretty flat pitches. So it was a good time for batting. Also, if you think of how Test cricket has evolved, there were fewer games where teams only batted once, far fewer draws, so slightly more innings in your 10 Tests. So I guess it tells us a few things about how cricket has evolved. So, yes, so 25, looking at 25 Test sequences, mentioned Aubrey Faulkner's all-round achievements. Imran Khan, in his best 25 Tests, averaged 14.2 with the ball. And he didn't bowl in 3 of those games, either because of injury. And we bang on about SF Barnes, who played 27 Tests and averaged just under 17. Imran had a 27-test sequence in which he had a better bowling average than SF Barnes in his 27 Tests. Imran had his best 27-test sequence, where he was also very productive with the bat. So I'm picking this specific one in those years. Averaged 15.3 with the ball and 48.9 with the bat. That is ridiculous. I don't think it's justification for keeping him in jail, however.
Well, careful. Yeah. Yes. I mean, I wanted to come home first before you start saying inflammatory things like that.
A couple of other 25s. And this touches on what I think is the worst piece of selection in modern English cricket history. Chris Broad played a total of 25 Tests. In 17 of them, between the start of the 86-7 Ashes and the first Test with the West Indies in 1988, he scored almost 1,300 runs at 48. He was England's highest scoring player, highest averaging player. He scored 600s. I think only Mike Gatting scored more than one in the same period for England. 4 other 50s. He got a 50 in the first Test against the West Indies against Marshall, Patterson, Ambrose and Walsh. Goes to Lords for the second Test. 0-1 out to Malcolm Marshall, who took 10 wickets in the match, and at that point had taken 238 wickets in his last 43 Tests, averaged 19, and became number 1 in the world rankings after that Test. And so, a good bowler to get out to twice in a Test. And England dropped him. They dropped him at a time when they were as shit as they've ever been, a period in which they won 3 Tests over the course of 4 years, and they dropped their most effective batter after one bad match in which Malcolm Marshall got him out twice.
So, who came in for him? Was it John Stevenson?
I think it was Tim Curtis.
Tim Curtis. Oh, Christ. Oh, God.
I'd have to check that.
Well, he scored some runs for Hampshire, for Worcestershire. Didn't they win the title in that year, or the year year, or the year after, something like that? So they'd had a look in the Daily Telegraph, and they'd seen what it said at the bottom of the page. When he made his Test debut in 1984, I think, at Lords against the West Indies, the head of selectors at the time, I think, would have been Peter May. If it was either May or Dexter, and said, Well, good luck, Brian, tomorrow, because he'd not watched any county cricket, not even on the telly, and so hadn't realised that BC Broad was actually called Chris. I mean, we didn't stand a fucking chance, did we?
Another 2,500. There was a test between Australia and India in Adelaide in 1967-8, which featured exactly 2,500 legitimate deliveries, one of only 2 tests in history to feature exactly 2,500 balls. The other was, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this, Zimbabwe against South Africa in Harare in September 2001. Featured exactly 2,000, and it finished on the 11th of September 2001, which is maybe not the most remembered historical event of that day.
Did he really?
Yes.
Did he really? Yeah, that game did pass me by, I've got to say.
Yes. 2,500 balls in the test. It was also, they played on Christmas Day, the 25th. There you go, 25th of December that year, as in so many other years as well. And in further 20 contrived 25 links. Just seeing when the rest day was the second day. They took the 24th off. They put in the 23rd, took the day off, and came back on Christmas Day. And in that game, 25-year-old David Renneberg took a fifer, dismissing 25-year-old Umesh Kulkarni to seal the match for Australia, prior to which 25 wickets have been taken by seamers in the match. So that's all you're getting on that particular game. And Mitchell Johnson averaged 25 with both bat and ball in tests in Australia. There you go. So that's my 25s, Dan.
I think you've been absolutely comprehensive on the 25s. I'm not sure if Tom Stewart is not happy with that ode to the number 25, then we don't stand a chance. Also,
yes.
It should be pointed out that you absolutely love the number 25, don't you? Because don't you believe that there should be people should note the quarter century more than
I do. Yes, I think that's one of the most underrated cricket stats. The quarter century, the regularity of 25ery is a good measure of a it's a useful measure of a player. Yes, 25. Also, 25. England used 25 players in 4 tests against the West Indies in 1950, the first series West Indies won against England. But they sort of surpassed that, of course. They used 29 in 1989. They used 30 in the 1921 Ashes in 5 tests. But 25 in a 4-test series, that is proper. I think the selectors were paid per change in those days.
That would make sense. Right, that's 25. So we're halfway through the show. Maybe a little bit more than halfway through the show, to be honest with you. But we're going to take a brief moment, a brief opportunity to pause and remind ourselves of where we are in the seasons. For those of you in the Southern Hemisphere, of course, you're filled with joy. What is to come, the warmth, the sun on your back, and cricket festooned around you in all manner of formats and parts of the far-flung world. But for those of us who are here in England, it's not so much fun, and soon enough it won't be for Zaltz either, as he returns to the rather withered bosom of southwest London. Cricket in December, it's fair to say, is a bit of a misnomer in the chilly UK. The winter months are dominated by weather warnings and Man City buying any kind of threat to their petrostate EPL dominance. But Ambassador Cruise Line are giving you the chance to shake that notion and be entertained by an awesome foursome who know a thing or two about winter cricket. Speak deep into the night with aggers and blowers and talk about their favourite tours. You can be certain that the glory days of the West Indies will rate a mention. Gucci and Alex Tudor will have their fair share too. What about those legendary Christmas pantomimes in Australia? All of this while stopping off in the Netherlands, Belgium and France. Honfleur, Rouen, Antwerp and Amsterdam. In affordable quality. Aboard an ambassadorship. All this at the ridiculously generous starting price of just £559 per person. And that's before you get 10% off because you listen to us. It's incredibly easy. Just visit ambassadorcruiseline.com and pop in final word 10, that's final word 10, at the checkout, then you'll be sailing away, beating the winter blues. It's in the show notes. Check it out. Ambassador Cruise Line, giving you the chance to cruise with cricket legends this December. And I'd heartily recommend that. I mean, having spent many times with Aggers and Blowers, a bit less time with Tudes and Gucci, I think we can all say that an evening reminiscing with them and then hopping off in the morning and buying foie gras, bringing it back and eating it in front of absolutely horrified friends who tell you that it should be illegal. So you just bathe in a great big wadge of force-fed goose and duck liver. Oh, and cheese. Think of the cheese. I mean, you do foie gras, don't you? You're not anti-foie gras, except conceptually, which of course it's evil.
Yeah, I'd have slightly mixed feelings about it now, but man, it's good.
Tastes good, though, doesn't it? Yeah, it does taste good. My issue, the way I see it is, as long as it's legal, I'd better eat it, because otherwise it'll get into the wrong hands.
Interestingly, Graham Gooch, his name comes from goose and cheese. They just took the first bit of each. That's a fact.
That must have been what was in my mind, I guess.
Yeah.
Now then, we're going to move on, because we still have 2 numbers to go. And I've been given the number 738. Does it come with a clue? Well, not really a clue as such. It sort of comes with a name. It has its own provenance. It's real. Don't get me wrong. It's from Evil Scootus, whom we know well from Twitter, and who's a big fan of the show. And all it is 7.38 in Aussie dollars. Now, that obviously gives us a lot of opportunities. 7:38. Not a great deal on the old date front. I suppose I could have looked up what happened on the 7th of March, 2008, 1908. I didn't really bother with that because there were too many things missing, really. Too many zeros in it. 73 for 8. So I had a strange feeling that there was an amazing game between England and Pakistan. I want to say Lords in about 1992 or 1992, when England set Pakistan a very small total and they were almost 73 for 8, but I don't think it was 73 for 8. It might have been 72 for 8.
It was a classic test.
Wasim was playing. Oh, it was an absolute beauty, wasn't it? Absolutely.
Ian Salisbury's debut.
Yes. We had great hopes at that point, didn't we?
Yeah, he took 5 wickets in the match. He had a very good day. I'm just getting the score up for you.
He averaged over 70, didn't he? In the
81 for 7.
81 for 7. So not quite
95 for 8. Yep. If you take out 22 runs, that's basically it.
Well, that was the thing. It just didn't work. So there's nothing much I could do about it. So that left me, basically, with going down other alleyways. And there are plenty to ponder. There's test match number 738, which, oddly, I did test match number 775 the other day and didn't realise what an incredible inflection point in the history of cricket it was going to be. Because it was, for those of you who were listening last time, India chasing 406 for 4 and the West Indies vowing never to pick a spinner again. And the result was world domination. And also the result was that the next test match, a whole bunch of Indians got terribly badly injured. And famously, Bisham Bailey declared with a score on that 97 for 5 and lost the game. But this is another really exciting test match in the West Indies, and it's another Port of Spain test match. So test match 775 was in Port of Spain, largely because of the terrible rains in Guyana. This one was just scheduled to be in Port of Spain, and a lot of test matches in Port of Spain are deathly dull. I mean, it's renowned for stick the matting down, absolutely nothing happens. And in those days, they used to play 6-day test matches, but 5 hours a day rather than 5 days at 6 hours because of the light. And it was just deemed absolutely impossible to play cricket early enough in the morning to be able to make the game go on late enough at night. So they had 6-day tests and they would have a day off. And very unlike Port of Spain test matches, it was actually a thriller, although a very, very, very slow-moving thriller. I mean, think of a race between the 2 greatest tortoises of all time. running a marathon. I don't know how how Brendan Foster could cope with that, but I guess he'd manage it. Slowly crawling down the mall, all crowd on their feet. The first tortoise, the red tortoise, what's it called? Bala the tortoise. Going at magnificent speed, his tiny little legs hopping up and down around about less than 1 mile per hour, getting up to about 0.78. The crowd going crazy, etc., etc. That was this test match in essence. It was a test match of incredible slothfulness, but numerical excitement. England made 267 in 135.3 overs. They're going at slightly under 2 and over. In it, Geoffrey Boycott, a man who always bridled at being accused of slow scoring, got very, very angry about it. And so in order to prove his critics wrong, scored 99 off 340 balls, albeit with 13 beautiful boundaries in there. 13 fours in 340 balls. He's got his eye in now. I bet 2 of them happened in the space of about 26 balls, and people got very excited and thought he'd unleashed. England, incidentally, in this match had Jack Birkinshaw, they had Pat Pocock, they had Derek Underwood. They'd gone in with the usual phalanx of spinners, which everybody did whenever you went to Port of Spain. For the West Indies, Inshan Ali, there's a name I vaguely remember. I remembered him because he was just before my time and he was discarded along with the likes of Jumadeen, those players who were never going to play again, Imtiaz Ali. Lance Gibbs got 3 for 70. The West Indies reply with 305. And this is the great West Indies side that's got the likes of Fredericks, Lawrence Rowe, Clive Lloyd. Hasn't yet got Viv Richards in, but it's got Alvin Kalitcharan, Rowan Kanai, Gary Sobers. You know, fast-scoring batters you tend to think of in your imagination at any rate, even if they may not have been in actuality. 305 and 117.1 overs. Really exciting. First wicket partnership 110. Then they made it to 224 for 2. They were just 45 runs behind England at this point. And they collapsed, losing their last 8 wickets for 81. Tony Greig, who many of you will think of as a kind of medium to medium fast bowling all-rounder. Well, he could also bowl off-spin. He resorted to off-spin. 8 for 86 he takes. The likes of Pocock and Underwood barely getting a look in. I think Underwood went wicketless in that first innings. Pocock got a couple. All the wickets going to the spinners, although I suppose we don't know, and not even your database can tell us whether Greg got, a couple of wickets bowling seam up. It must be very irritating for you, that.
Yes, it is.
The same thing true of Gary Sobers as well. You just don't know how many he took with left arm.
They play
orthodox, how many with...
havoc with the stats. Craig White, Colin Funky Miller, any bowler that is categorised as mixed or unknown on the Cricinfo database. For some reason, they have the England leg spinner Doug Wright as mixed or unknown when he was clearly a leg spinner. That also plays merry havoc with the stats. So if you're listening, can you fix that, please?
I suppose it's tricky. You need some footage and you need scorers to make a note of it, don't you? And maybe they probably didn't, which is part of the issue because no one was anticipating our future.
Yes.
Anyway, they're bowled out for 305, 38-run first innings lead. It's not much, is it? It's not much, especially not at Port of Spain. England, sensing danger. They don't so much run towards the danger as sidle quietly out through the back door, trying to distract the West Indies, hoping that they won't notice. And they bat for 149.2 overs to score 263. You've guessed it, the major culprit is Geoffrey Boycott. 112 this time, so he got his 100. Must be one of the very few players to have 99 and 100 in a test match, I would think. That must be fairly rare. 112 off 385 balls, meaning that he managed in the entire match to score 211 in 725 balls, which is 120.5 six-ball overs. Thrilling stuff. The record doesn't tell me whether he slowed down the longer he was there or whether he got quicker or whether he just stayed like those 2 tortoises going up the mall, being cheered on by Brendan Foster and an adoring crowd. So where was I? Yes. So at this point, he's managed to, I say edge, I mean maybe it came off the middle of his bat with singles here and there, to take England up to 263. Still doesn't feel like enough, does it? Doesn't feel like enough. Because the second the West Indies on what remains a featherbed, 226 to win. But clearly, spinners are coming to the fore. And, well, it's Greg again. He gets 5 for 70. The West Indies this time collapsed on 63 without loss. 63 without loss to be all out for 199. England win by 25 runs. That to me is thrilling Test cricket, Zolt.
Yes.
And I think Brendan McCullum has got a lot to answer for, because I don't think you're ever going to get a 6-day Test match that produces sod all runs. What was it? 800 and something runs. No, sorry, 1,034 runs in 488.3 overs. I mean, that is fucking cerebral. Dreadful what's happening to the younger generation.
Yes,
but
it
beautiful game. Have you got a list of people with 99s and
I have.
and 100?
Yeah, there's 2 people on the list. Jeffrey Boycott in that match, and Ricky Ponting, who had 101 and 99 in the second innings against South Africa at the MCG in 2008 in the Boxing Day Test, which I remember watching live. And the reason I would have watched it live is because my son was born a couple of weeks before that, and I did an awful lot of volunteering for overnight baby duty, possibly coinciding with the MCG Test match, giving me something to put on the telly. So that was, Ponting caught Amla bowled Harris, Paul Harris of all people, in the first innings for 101. And in the second innings, it was caught Smith, Graham Smith bowled Morkel for 99.
I tried to imagine, with the time zone being the completely opposite direction for the West Indies, would you have done baby duty at 4 o'clock in the afternoon while watching Boycott make his way slowly to 99 from 340 balls?
Joyously done. Joyously, I'd have done it.
Actually, I think you would. I think you would. That's Test match number 738. So let's try ODI number 738. Do we get an interesting story about that? Not really. There's only one notable thing about this one-day international. It's dog shit, mostly. Zimbabwe, 163. South Africa, 164 for 3. The only thing that could have made that worse is if South Africa had waited until the 50th over to knock them off. I've seen sort of similar, but they're terribly disappointing. The only notable thing, well, there are 2, but it's John Tracos, who is well known to listeners of The Final Word for his incredibly long playing career and playing for 2 different countries, because he's playing 22 years after he played for the South African men's team in their last Test match before the ban. And that's sort of where we get this stat from, isn't it? The 22-year time span and all that kind of thing. That's so there is, there's something important about that ODI, but also as a kind of, and it's not ironic, it's purely coincidental. People use the word irony and ironic totally wrongly, but Kepler Wessels appears in that game, and he's played for South Africa when, of course, the Quisling traitor, turncoat bastard, had been perfectly happy plying his trade for Australia, very successfully on occasion against England. Didn't he get 160 odd against England at some point?
He did, 162 in the 82-83 Ashes. Might even have been on debut, was it?
Yeah, I think it might have been. What was it about South African left-handers that they were on a one-man, or in this case, many-man mission to destroy the cliche that left-handers are the most beautiful things in cricket?
It's an absolute myth. It's one of the things that annoys me most. How, left-handers are always so elegant. And, like Wessels, Gary Kirsten, outstanding player, but, I mean, he was not an aesthetic delight. Graham Smith, who, again, fantastic player. And kind of interesting to watch. He was more attacking, but it did look like he learnt to bat in a room full of Picasso paintings. Just none of those angles were right. There's many more. Ashwell Prince, the nuggety
Shivnarine Chandapal, bloody Chandapal.
In fact, I think you could make a good argument that a lot of the least attractive players are left-handers.
Yeah, well, I think we should try to do it. We'll put that to the listeners if they can come up with the most unattractive left-hander combination. I think Paul Adams has got to be bowling.
I'd take Paul Harris ahead of Paul Adams, just because Paul Adams was.
Put them both in. It's
so
South Africans
weird.
Again. It's South African left armers, left handers. There's something about South Africans when they do lefty stuff. They absolutely hate it. I suppose maybe it's sort of ingrained in the South African temperament to be anti-lefty. and I'll leave you all at home to work out why I might think that. That's ODI number 738. You pointed out to me that Alistair Cook made 738 runs in 2011. India must have copped it pretty badly in that summer.
Well, he made his 294.
That was the summer of Dravid, wasn't it? Was that the summer when Dravid couldn't be got out for the entire summer?
Well, he made 300s in 4 tests, and no other Indian player made any. It was India in maybe a post-World Cup come down. They, and in fact, the 2 Indian players who did best with the bat was Dravid, and with the ball was Praveen Kumar. Neither of them had played in the 2011 World Cup, so that might have been a factor.
So now I'm going to move on to 7 for 38s, of which we can find only 2. And I'm going to begin with my favourite, because Zaltz has actually slightly prefigured this by complaining about what is and is not classified as a test match. And I tend to agree with him, certainly about the rest of the World Games. I think they should just be test matches because they were very good. I don't quite know how you get the Packer ones to be test matches, although the quality of the play was awesome, but they are completely made up. I mean, we might as well stage test matches if we're going to allow that, and they would be bloody high quality. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think we can get them as test matches. This match was played in Iberja. Where, I hear you cry? Iberja. No, actually, Iberja. Yes, I've been practicing. And if you want to try to make the noise Iberja, simply click your mouth and then say the word burqa in a Scouse accent. Iberja. It's easily done. It's otherwise known as Port Elizabeth, and it takes place in 1896, and it's part of what makes the legend that is George Lohman. George Lohman, whose brother, incidentally, coached the original English lady cricketers in 1890 and 1891, who were the first professional women's cricket team, and no women were paid to play cricket in Britain. Didn't get professional contracts until 2014. So disgusted was the British population by the idea of women playing cricket for money in 1890. They barely recovered from it. It took 125 years or so to get it back on track. But George Lohman's brother coached them. However, we're talking about the original, the one and only, the great George Lohman, so beloved of Stats fans and the Final Word fans because his numbers just scream at you, don't they? His absurd bowling average. He feels like a standout, and he also plays for Surrey, so he must be a good player. And him and Tom Richardson together, just imagine. Anyway, in the test match,
you say that, Dan, and they played, I think, only one test match together. They played a lot for Surrey together, and Lohman had famously that test bowling average of 10.7. Richardson averaged 25. But if you compare them with their teammates in the same games, they were better than their teammates by an almost identical ratio.
Yeah, right.
And yet their careers overlapped slightly. But that shows was the evolution of cricket over quite a short period of time, from the 1880s to the 1890s, as batting pitches became a lot better very quickly.
And I suppose batters, there'd be the pitches, and there'd be also the fact that there were few more professionals, and people just had better facilities, so they just hit more balls, didn't they? So you get this thing where bowlers actually start to struggle. It reminds me a bit of the evolution of women's cricket, where the score's relatively low, even in the early part of this century, and you now see that batting can dominate, and bowlers have to respond to this simply because when you took 3 wickets in a women's game, even back in the late 2000s, you were bowling at women who'd barely practiced hitting a ball, whereas now your number 8, 9 can more than hold a bat. They're pros, they play domestic cricket, they hit balls. You see a lot of this happening in our golden age, but George Lohman's managed to sidestep that in 1896 by going to South Africa, which is the cheat code, really. Does he get 38 wickets in 3 matches in this series at an average of about 6 or something fucking ludicrous? I mean, it's so absurd.
It's what was it? And they do skew here's another stat from one of those early South Africa tests. The first test century by a wicketkeeper was scored by Wood of Surrey, who in about, I can't remember, 600 other first-class matches never made a century and got 134 not out in a test match, what became subsequently a test match. So it wasn't until sometime later that a wicketkeeper scored a century whilst aware that he was actually playing a test match.
yeah, I mean, that is insane, isn't it? Basically, only England and Australia were playing test matches. But in this test match, England make 185, and a couple of things scream out at me. One is that George Lohman opens the batting and gets a duck. Why is he opening the batting?
He was quite a handy batter, I think. Not so much
he's not
in
an
test,
opener.
but-
He's not, well, it wasn't in your mind. It's not a test match, so I suppose there's fairness to this. It does feel like a benefit game because everybody is just batting all over the place. Tom Hayward, who is an opening batter, bats at number 3. Is effectively opening, like every England number 3 after Alistair Cook and before Duckett and Crawley. He makes 43 at number 3. Lord Hawke, who I've always taken against, and perhaps I shouldn't have done, but there's something about him makes me generally not like him. He made a duck when he was batting. I think he was batting in the first innings at 8. In the second innings, he bats at 10. Of course he does, and gets 30 in a last wicket partnership. Lohman in the second innings bats at 6, incidentally, and guess what? He gets another duck against his absolutely hopeless side. People are just batting all over the place. Bromley Davenport, he was at 7 in the first, and he's got 26. Went, no, that's not enough. Down you go, bat at number 9.
I think my dad learnt to. I think my dad learnt to drive in a Bromley Davenport.
Yeah, I mean, this feels very much like an invitation 11. But why, you may say, am I linking this to 7:38? Well, it's because George Lohman took 7 for 38 in the first innings. The South Africa were bundled out for 93 in response to England's 185, conceding a lead of 92. All 7 of them are bowled, which suggests to me that the South African batters didn't have the best defensive technique.
Well, I could. There's a stat on that, Dan.
Is there?
Yes. So all 7 were bowled for Lohman in that innings. When Johnny Briggs took 8 in 1889 at Newlands against South Africa, the England left-arm spinner, he bowled out 8 players. I'm not sure if he might have got 9 in one of the innings. I can't quite remember. Anyway, 8 bowled out. Lohman bowled out 7. And those are 2 of the 3 occasions on which a bowler has bowled out 7 of the opposition. Lohman did the other one, that was against Australia at the SCG. There were 3 other instances of a bowler bowling out 6 players in an innings. One was Briggs in the same game in the first innings against South Africa at Newlands. So he bowled out 14 of his 15 wickets in the match. And Tom Richardson against Australia at Lords in 1896, who can forget that one? And George Giffen at the SCG in 1885 for Australia. Since then, only 3 more. Bill Bowes against New Zealand when they were very new in 1933, Mohammed Nazir of Pakistan against New Zealand in 1969, and Michael Holding at the Oval in 1976, which I believe might be... Was that the first test match you went to?
Yes, and he basically, you couldn't have got anybody out any other way because it was very, very placid wicket. You sort of think of that series as being full of fiery, fast bowling, very, very dangerous. But, West Indies got 680 odd, England got over 400 in reply. There were double centurions. Amos got a double 100. And Holding just bowled very full and very straight. And there's footage of that. There's plenty of footage of that. You can see him targeting the stumps at some fearsome pace. But he had to take the pitch out of the equation because there was absolutely nothing in it for the bowlers.
Yes.
Lohman, sorry, just to finish, you'll come back to you on that because Lohman, because you mentioned that Briggs took, 8 plus 6?
Yes.
Because Lohman gets 5 of them bowled in the second inning. So he gets 7 plus 5. So 12 in the match is pretty good, isn't it?
Well, yeah, so Michael Holding in 76, he hit the stumps 6 times in the first innings, 3 times in the second. No other bowler has bowled out more than 7 opponents in a test match since the 1890s, and Holding bowled out 9 at the Oval on one of the flattest pitches ever. 14 for 149 in the match, 10.6 per wicket. All the other bowlers combined in the match also took 14 wickets for 1,254, averaging 89 per wicket. I think it might be the greatest single match of fast bowling in cricket history. Also, linking it back to our previous pledge, is one of 25 instances of a bowler taking 14 or more wickets in a test.
Oh, 25. Fantastic.
25.
Oh, everything comes around, doesn't it? Where was I? They got a lead of 92. They scored 226 in the second innings. None of the batting is really of any interest at all to us because obviously there was something going on this pitch and the South Africans just weren't good enough to really do them. because in the second innings they bowled out for 30. 30. Lohmann with the utterly memorable figures of 8 for 7. I mean, if that's not imprinted on any stats nerd's brain, I don't know what is. As we said, 5 of them bowled to go with his other 7, making 12 for the match. And Tom Hayward, who had batted at 3 when he should have been opening, because that's where he did for Surrey, he decided, sod this for a game of soldiers, I'm having a bowl. So he took 1 for none off 2, which was nice. There were only 3 bowlers used in the second innings as South Africa scored the second lowest score in Test history. It had been the lowest at the time, 30 all out, 26 being the famous South African, New Zealand effort. Australia were close, weren't they, when they were 25 for 9, but Nathan Lyon got them out of trouble. Got them to 47 all out. Or
25 again.
Yeah, 21 good point. Yeah.
England were 27 for 9, I think, in New Zealand in that first test in 2018.
God, that was an incredible one. Yeah. I watched that in a beautiful hotel in Barbados when I got to cover the North v South series. That is the greatest junket I've ever been on in my life. BBC didn't pay for it. It was a Barbados tourist board, so just be absolutely clear about that. Go Barbados. If you many fine places to go on holiday. Well, Bumble says all sorts of good places in the Caribbean, aren't there? You got your St Martins, you got Antigua and Barbuda. But for me, it's always Barbados. Anyway, that's a mild digression. We're not actually sponsored by the Barbados Tourist Board. Maybe that'll come. That'll be nice. So that's one 7 for 38, but there is one other 7 for 38. And because it's Evil Scooters and because it's in AUD, I'm pretty sure the 7 for 38 that he is referring to is a match that, I mean, look, there's stuff in this game, but it's not a game that leaps out at you because it's Australia playing against India in a series that they dominate, in a series that in 1948. So we're just coming up to the Invincibles. There's incredible players in this team, of course, the likes of Lindsay Hassett, who scores 198 not out. He's thwarted because is it Johnson's at the other end gets out the number 11, I think. Although in fairness, he had batted with him for quite a while to get him up to 198. Bradman gets another double 100, 201. Barnes, 112. Keith Miller's batting at 5 in that game, scores 67. One of my most favourite names in cricket, Commander Rangachari, gets 4 for 41. Great name, Commander, isn't it? I mean, kissing your kid Commander. A mate of mine was very naughty about 30 years ago and ended up having to do community service dredging the Serpentine. And there was this 18-year-old lad that he was working with who had been christened by his parents Sir Flight, surname Lancaster, because they thought that would give him a better chance in life. He ended up doing community service as well. Unlike, I believe, Commander Rangachari. I mean, it's spelled with a U on the end. Commander Rangachari, 4 for 141. Vinu Mankad's playing in that game. Vijay Hazar gets twin hundreds, 116 and 145, but it's never going to be enough as there are 4 ducks in the second innings. Even Vinu Mankad gets a duck. Lala Ramanath, one of the greats, gets a duck as India are following on 293 runs behind Australia's 694 and rather unsurprisingly bowled out for 277. But in there, Ray Lindwall features 7 for 38. The only other 7 for 38, I venture it was probably a harder fought 7 for 38 than George Lohmann's 7 for 38. And just to continue the theme of people being bowled, he has four batters are bowled in that effort. That 7 for 38. I mean, it's not quite the 7 plus 5 of Lohmann, but if you sort of allow for inflation and quality of opposition, the likes of Mankad, Armanar, Hazar, Datu Padkar, probably worth it. Probably worth 12 bowls, you'd think, on an Australian pitch. So that's Lindwall, 7 for 38. That is all the 7 for 38s I've got for you. I've covered as much 7 for 38.
That was his best, the best of his 3 7-fers for Australia. Can you tell me, Dan, what does Ray Lindwall, as a test bowler, have in common with Bob Willis, Brett Lee, Morne Morkel, Joel Garner, Jeff Thompson, Jasprit Bumrah, Ian Bishop?
They're all very good. They're all very good, very fast. No ball problems, stress fractures at the back.
No.
No. No, they haven't got the same highest test score because Lindwall can bat.
No. He got a couple of hundreds, I think. No, none of them ever took a 10-wicket match haul.
Oh, yeah. Joel Garner didn't, did he? Ray Lindwall never got a 10 for. Really?
Josh Hazlewood doesn't have one.
No.
Darren Goff, Mohammed Shami.
Quite tricky for the West Indians in the 70s because you've got 4 fast bowlers who are all fearsomely good, haven't you? So they really do spread them around. But I suppose that's what makes Holdings 14 for quite notable, doesn't it? You know, and when
Indeed.
Marshall could do it. That's a lot of players not to have a 10 for, isn't it?
Isn't it?
Yeah. What a lovely note to end 738 on. So there you go, Evil Scooters. That's your 738. We've got one remaining number today. We said let's try and keep it to 15 to 20 minutes per number. That's been blown out the water.
I'm very late for my dinner appointment with my TMS colleagues.
You are. I'm so sorry about that. You should have mentioned there was a cut-off. Go for it.
So this is 5.77 New Zealand dollars from Emily Price. Thank you, Emily. And Emily's clue is a rare bowler kept short. So 577. And, you mentioned that test in the West Indies in 1974 and Garfield Sobers. That was his last test, and he got 0 and 20, and that took his test batting average down to 57.7. I only like to go to 3 digits in my cricket stats, so I'll ignore the 8 that is generally tagged on the end as the pointless second decimal place in a batting average.
That should be 57.8 then.
Rare bowler. But cricket always rounds down, oddly. Otherwise, we'd all say Bradman had an average of 100, and anyway.
No, we're not having that.
57.78. Rare bowler in that he bowled everything. So I wondered if kept short, whether he kept wicket when West Indies were short or someone got injured, but I couldn't find any evidence of that. So I'm scratching Garfield Sobers as the 5.77. Matthew Hart of New Zealand is the only New Zealand bowler who, in fact, the only test bowler whose best test figures are 5 for 77. But I think that's too obtuse, even for this. Even more obtuse. I mean, maybe, Emily, you are a huge fan of Atta-ur-Rahman, the Pakistani fast bowler of the 1990s, who bowled in all formats 577.3 overs. Aubrey Faulkner, aforementioned Aubrey Faulkner, reduced England to 57 for 7 in the 1907 Leeds Test when he bowled Ted Arnold, but England recovered to win. So it wouldn't have been that. MS Dhoni, a rare bowler. He bowled occasionally, 7 innings in tests, 2 in ODIs. His ODI batting average was 50.57, which is sort of 5.77 if you get it wrong, and move the decimal point and change one of the 5s to a 7. He scored 567 sixes in T20s and 10 in ODI hundreds. You have those together. But no. So what I'm going for is this. I think this is what you're going for, Emily. 1884 Oval Test match. Australia piled on the runs. It was a rather extraordinary game. It featured the first ever Test double century by Billy Murdoch. It was the first time 3 players scored centuries in the same innings, and the only time before the First World War, as well as Murdoch's double 100. Percy McDonnell and Top Scott also made hundreds. It featured the first 200 stand between Murdoch and Scott, was over 10 years before the next one, which was one of the great partnerships, Dan. J.T. Brown and Albert Ward in the fourth and deciding innings of the 5th and deciding Test match of the 1894-95 Ashes, put on 210 for England's 3rd wicket from 28 for 2, chasing 297, got England to 238 before Brown was out for a coruscating 140 at a run a minute, one of the great innings of all time by an England player. His bat from that innings recently sold for something like £25,000 at auction. So it's good to know
Jesus.
that. I said £25,000. I'm not sure it was £25,000, but it was a lot. And I'm going to say 25,000 to link it back into the 25. It was, the first time there'd been not only just 3 centuries in the same game, but 200 and 2 other 100s. It took ages for the next one. That was the Lord's Test of 1924. And here's another link back, Dan. That was Aubrey Faulkner's 25th and final test, in which he came out of retirement, having not played Test cricket for 12 years. He was based in England, coaching cricket by then. He was way past his best, scratched around and scored, would you believe it, 25. Anyway, that's too many 25s. We're going back to the 5-7-7. So Australia piled up the runs. They got to 530-odd for 6. And at this point, England's wicketkeeper, Alfred Littleton, bowled. And he took 4 for 19, bowling underarm lobs. And that skittled through Australia's tail, and they were all out for 551, having been 532 for 6, 4 for 19.
Would that still have been? Would that have been seen even then as a bit de trop? Because I've just finished reading this book on the original English lady cricketers, and there's a lot of sort of like newspaper reports around at the time, and they make it very clear. The coaches make it very clear that they all bowl overarm. You know, no lob bowling, and that's in 1890. So this is only 6 years before. Would it have been seen as, if you pardon the pun, slightly underhand?
I don't know, to be honest. Also, it was a 3-day test, and so this would have been deep into day 2, and I don't think the declaration had been invented at that point. So I don't know if it might have been Australia giving their wickets away. It was hard to get the sort of details on exactly how those wickets fell. But anyway, it remains the only instance in men's international cricket in which a wicketkeeper has taken more than one wicket in an innings. There was a women's test match in 1985, New Zealand against India, when New Zealand's Ingrid Jaggersma took 4 wickets. Those are all of the wickets ever taken by a wicketkeeper in women's test cricket were taken by Ingrid, in that she was the 11th bowler used and took 4 Indian wickets in that game.
Think how many Betty Snowball would have taken if she'd been given the chance.
She would have done anything. So back to Alfred Littleton. Took 4 for 19, and he was born on the 7th of February, 1857. So to shorten his birth date, if you do it year, month, day, 1857, 02, 07, you take out the middle digits, you've got 577, which is this pledge.
Christ.
And it was an occasional bowler who kept, and his birth date has been shortened. So that is
I think you got it
right.
Well, I mean, look, it might not be right, but it feels right. And if it isn't, come back to us with another clue. But a rare bowler, I like that. Rare. I mean, yeah.
If you want to tie it in even further, Billy Murdoch, who scored the first Test double 100 in this game, was dropped 3 times off the bowling of George Ulyett, see above, and Billy Murdoch collapsed and died when watching the Australia-South Africa game at the MCG in 1910-11, in which Aubrey Faulkner top scored in South Africa's second innings. In Australia's second innings of that game, they scored 578, disappointingly. But let's say they counted it wrong and it was only 577.
Well, I think that's absolutely nailed it. I mean, today we have perambulated at great length, I know, and we've delayed your dinner. I'm so sorry about that. And especially because you're now in a good hotel. And so God knows what you will be eating. Chinese or something?
Going for Chinese, yes. Yeah.
Yeah. You always get good. You get very nice Chinese in a good Pakistan restaurant, I find. People may not be aware of that, but go for it. And we've also found so many links within the show, links to previous shows. It's the way the numbers work. It's the way Nerd Pledge works. It's the soothing balm of numbers that wash over us all. And who better to wash them over with us than chief balm maker of Test Bat Special, Andy Zaltzman. Thank you so much. I can't think of a more appropriate man for Final Word story time. Although having discovered quite how long it is and that it doesn't take 10 minutes after all, he may never want to do this again. But I must thank you all of your listeners, all of our listeners, for your pledges that have come in. The 738, the 577, the 105, and the other one that we had, 25 glorious British pounds. And, of course, we must thank Ambassador Cruise Line, allowing us to cruise with cricket legends this December. But for Storytime 206, from me, Daniel Norcross, and from you, Andy Zaltzman, it is goodbye.